Hey, Paul.
Yes. I've seen some of your AI generated posts. This thing's a pretty good writer.
Yeah, yeah, and they're incredibly popular too. I'm actually somewhat astounded as to the feedback that I get from those ones.
Oh yeah.
Well, I thought they'd be kind of mildly interesting, but I get quite a lot of enthusiastic feedback about it. Mm.
Yeah. I think everybody's still kind of amazed at the technology in a sense. I know I am, you know.
Yeah, 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 me too. Yeah, it does an incredibly good job, and usually on the first take. Occasionally you need to tweak it, but yeah, just say do it again, but a bit more, be a bit more warm, and it'll do it.
Huh. It understands the nuances of warm.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
That's pretty, that's subtle stuff.
Mm. And there's a noticeable difference when it does that too. You know, it really is more warm. Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah, I think that the short story form, the 500 word story is attractive. And I imagine that that's perhaps because of how we've been trained by social media to have a short attention span.
Yeah. It's been going shorter and shorter over the years.
Mm.
It's young people nowadays, I don't know how they absorb anything, but they seem to manage.
Yeah, we're adjustable, aren't we?
Infinitely, apparently.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's us and cockroaches. That's why we've survived.
I guess.
Yeah,
What's to
that would.
what's what's to say?
Nothing.
Talk about nothing. It's,
Talk about
I mean,
nothing.
we could talk, but we talk, but I mean, we talk about everything but this, really, because you
I
know.
loved your there's a recording on Vince's YouTube of you right at the beginning of speaking to a lady, and I really, really got a lot out of that, I have to say.
Oh, that was Diana,
Yep.
Yeah.
nice looking young blonde woman. Yeah, that was Vince clipped that out of I don't know, the end of a meeting, I think, or something. It seems to
Yeah,
have
yeah.
helped a few people. I'm glad.
It was very popular and very well received. Yeah. No, it was a great explanation of this. Yeah.
Yeah.
It went on for a while. So one of the things that I I considered, but it's kind of been dismissed a bit, essentially because a couple of people have given me feedback that thought I was wrong about it, and that was that I wondered whether or not it would be better to have groups with people that were still seekers and groups that were post-awakened people and have them separate, just because some of the some of the guiding for a post-awakened is nuanced and different and probably a bit meaningless to those who are still seekers. and then last meeting I felt a bit self-conscious about repeating myself for the new people that turned up and for the old people that were there listening to what they've heard 100 times. And that was just a moment of identification happening here, but nevertheless, I wondered about that. But I was talked out of that as I talked it around, saying they were saying actually that it was good value to have a mixture of people, post and still seekers. What are your thoughts, Paul?
Uh, Interesting. You mean like a meeting for people just 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 who have just passed the gate, and then a meeting for those who haven't passed the gate?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's obvious
Yeah,
that people who've passed the gate, whether they're just passed, probably more so, but or even if they're long past, they're still going to get triggered. They're still going to come up with things to look at. But the guiding there is much more nuanced than it would be with seekers.
yeah, I get that. I would go with and I don't know why, but I would go with the mixed crew,
Yep.
bouncing, bouncing different levels. If it, there's not that there's really any different levels, but
Yeah, I know. I get what you
it's like
mean,
when
though.
yeah, nuanced against non-nuanced, so to speak. You know, maybe some middle ground can come out of that you could consider progress. So I would always think a mixed crowd, although that that'll work. I would say the shortcoming is if you got some neo Advaita that says, "Oh, there's no one here, no one there, nothing ever happened," that kind of stuff, which isn't helpful. You know, it's like,
Yeah.
where do you go with that? And purists. But the practical crowd, the practical people I've heard in here, guides who have recently started or been at it for a while, I think it's all useful. Um, sometimes you tune out to that stuff, people tune out to it, and then other times people tune into it. Just some trick of the phrase, or people kind of, I mean, you know what I'm talking about. Just some turn of the phrase sometimes will
Yeah.
click
Yeah.
with people.
Stuff that
So,
resonates. Yeah.
and I think you'd have a post post awakening. I mean, I just wonder how many people would actually come and show up for something like that, because it would almost be like, your guiding thing where you got a lot of people who have been awakened and are starting to guide, and they don't seem to be interested in the conversation much. They just
Yeah.
kick
Yeah.
right in and start guiding. So I don't know. It if you it seemed to me, at least as far as having a good crowd that can bounce things off of each other, the attendance would probably be better with a good mixture.
Mm.
Just my knee-jerk reaction to the whole idea.
Yep. Yeah, I get that. Yeah.
This kind of stuff's kind of gonna wax and wane. This even non-duality is kind of like restaurants. You got people who want to go in for a while and then they'll go somewhere else. You get tired of it and go somewhere else for a while, and just for
Yeah.
a variety. They go into other non-dual groups and they'll get tired of that. They kind of cycle around. So, um, people are still people no matter what.
Mm. Mm. Yeah.
Do you have Joan Tollefson lined up? I really like her.
Yeah.
Like her
Yeah.
writing.
Mm.
Yeah, she's agreed. She's agreed to a discussion, just a one-on-one. She doesn't want to come to the group, and
Yeah.
and neither did Judy Cohen want to come to the group. So yeah, they both resonate with me. I say jokingly that they agree with me, but then they've never heard of me, of course. But they're good because they agree with me
I'm not
about
familiar
things.
with Judy Cohen. Somehow or
Yeah.
another, I slipped past her.
Okay. Yeah. No, she's pretty good. Um, She does a regular newsletter, short form newsletter. Just has a little rave about something. But yeah, she's good.
She's on YouTube?
I don't know. She's certainly on Substack. I'll I'll
Okay.
s- I'll find a link and send it to you.
I barely do any kind of Substack stuff.
Mm.
Uh, yeah, cool. I may have heard the name before, but Joan, I used to read all of her stuff regularly.
Yeah. Joan's more verbose, if you like, but has a beautiful way with words. I just love the way she expresses herself.
Yeah,
Mm.
yeah, for sure. You got anybody else in the queue?
Well, I stopped looking for anybody else. There are
Oh,
other possibilities, but I thought let's just see what happens with them first. Um, yeah, there's a lot going on at the moment. What's kind of nudging the edge of consciousness is to have one of the other three groups alongside the Friday group not published, to have that private. But I'm not sure which one I should do with that one with. So we'll see.
not published so they'll speak more freely, you mean?
Yeah.
Okay.
A few people have indicated that one. And Lou, just while I'm at it, there's definitely not any possibility to spotlight anybody anywhere on my Zoom. So when there
Mm,
you go. Now I can see it. Um, so will I
brilliant.
spotlight for everybody?
Yeah. So
Right.
just do it on your video on Vince, do spotlight for everyone.
Oh, there it is
Mm,
down there. Yeah. Okay. So it wasn't here, but maybe it's only appears when we've got a certain number of people.
there you
Yeah.
go. Brilliant.
Mm.
Oh, that'd be great.
Okay, that didn't
And then
change
if you
anything for me at this end. I'm still seeing the
so
same
from
thing.
so from this end we can see you and then everybody else is in the little boxes
Oh, okay.
still.
Well, that's the way it is for me anyway, because I went to speak of you.
Yeah. So hopefully when you see me, send me the speak of you, the recording will just be of you speaking and not anybody else.
Right.
That'd be much easier.
Okay.
That'd be
Yeah.
much better. Yeah.
So the difference now is that when you speak, you don't become the main big person. I've got to
Yeah.
sit here and look at my own ugly face the whole time.
Yeah.
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 Okay. I looked and looked and looked and couldn't find Spotlight, but it did not appear till just now. Yeah.
Brilliant. Cool.
So just for Paul's benefit, what we're going to do is cut out some short clips to put um, I suppose you call them teasers or whatever to help to direct people to come to these groups. So I want more, but I don't want too many. That's a trick, isn't it? So, like you, Paul, I've got this. I haven't yet asked, but I will ask um, on the mail outs for suggestions from people to for questions or rather subjects to speak about with these speakers. And I mean, you and I could also speak of them, or me and Marius. Um, they're points where people are stuck or people have a particular interest in. I'd really rather them it be where they're stuck rather than some philosophical thing. But the problem is that I guess you, like me, we don't have any memory of what it's like to be a seeker. So it's really difficult to come up with things that people might be interested in. I try to think of a question to ask, and I have no idea. What am I going to ask? What am I going to talk about with these people? So I need people who are still seekers or people who are stuck to come up with something for me to speak about.
Yeah. That's one thing about new guides that I think is they can still compare. You know, you still have a memory of of not getting it, as odd as that may sound.
Yeah,
You kind of have you can
yeah, I know
see
what you
how
mean.
people are stuck in beliefs, whereas I simply
Yeah,
I knew intellectually how people can be stuck in belief, and it's tied to bodily and all that, but I can only imagine what it's like to be actually stuck in a belief, you know.
yeah,
It's like foreign or something, but uh and that's why the new guides sometimes they have a that fresh perspective can be very effective.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, every time I try and think of one of those things, it just like the answer comes with the question, and it's so obvious that what's the point? Yeah,
Yeah, what's to say?
Well,
So
it occurs to me that that in itself might be quite an interesting conversation I'd be quite interested in listening to you and Paul having that kind of conversation with new guides. That would be something a bit different.
mm,
well, he had a guiding group for a while, which had some attendance, not much, which was pretty interesting. And it was interesting to me, the perspectives of the newer guys, and maybe they got something from me and Vince. I assume they did. They kept coming for a while, but yeah, I don't know what to say about it. It's
it was surprising how many videos we did with that guide training group, and I still point anybody I mentor, I point them to that group to go and have a look at those videos. So there's still some value there for some people. But yeah, I was surprised at how little interest there was for new guides in that. I thought they'd all be really keen to talk to older guides and get some clues, and they weren't. They weren't really.
well,
A
you
couple,
know, I
only
thought
a,
about that too. And what I've noticed is a transition. You know, it used to be hardly anybody used those exercises. A couple of guides did. Stacy came along and she's very firm on the use of the exercises, and it's like a machine with it, and it's very
mm,
effective apparently. And I think a lot of the new guides I see when I read through threads that a lot of the new guides are using the exercises more because they are direct experience exercises. They are very effective. I'm really surprised that I didn't use them more back then. And they are, so instead of trying to learn more, try to learn more techniques from someone, they're just using those as a basis of the conversation, and then they take it from there based on the client's response, which I think is a very effective tool. You know, you use a direct experience exercise one after another, depending on what the client says, and you find hopefully an exercise that kind of fits what their response was and get their sticking point. And then use that, whatever their response is you use the intuitive response to join into that. And it's kind of a mixture of just pure exercises and intuitive guiding. And I think it seems to work pretty well. And so I think it's more automatic. It's easier to start. The
yeah,
learning curve
yeah,
seems to be easier for guys to start, and there seems to be more materials to help new guys start in the files section. You know, because if you can get over that first post, introduction, here's what you need to know, here's the post you need to look at, here's the videos you need to look at, okay, and here's an opening exercise. If you know, for new guys, if you can get over that new learning curve hump, just the first start, then it's easier after that because you're just responding and responding and responding. So I think it's a lot easier to start guiding now once you just make the decision. Because back when I started, there really wasn't anything to go by. There wasn't even really much of a formal introduction. You just said, "Hi, I'm Paul, and
Yeah, where you
let's
went.
go
Yeah,
with it."
yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, I
so I
wondered.
think there's some of it.
I wonder about that and the use of the chatbot as well. Whether or not, if guides rely on those things, whether they won't develop that intuitive way of looking at things. I mean, I believe for myself when I first started guiding, and when I recommend others guide, that they trust that their new perspective on things is enough for them to be able to point to where others are using the old perspective as a way of seeing the world, and that's enough. But now we've got those exercises and the chatbot. It's too easy to rely on them and not develop the intuition. But that's just a story in my head, and I immediately imagine another story, which is they can't help but develop their intuition. It'll happen anyway. So yeah,
Yeah, interesting points of view. Uh, it seems to once you've seen this, it does seem to kind of come naturally how to
yeah,
point.
yeah.
Once
I
you
mean,
see that the
it
eye,
jumps out at you when they're mistaking
right,
concept for reality. It just shouts out really loud, doesn't it?
right. I mean, and your response can get better over the years, but you just spot it. Once you see that eye is just a concept, and you see that people have this firm belief and this strong feeling attached to it, yeah, it sticks out like a sore thumb. So it's just a question of how to respond to it, which intuitively, I mean, will you develop that intuition by various methods? I don't know. It
Yeah, yeah. Well, it's the same
seems
thing
to work.
in the groups here. I, Somebody recently referred to them as support groups, and I kind of balked a little bit at that. I thought, I don't know that that's really a good description of what happens here. And then I kind of went on to think that there is a lot of pointing goes on in these groups. So you can call pointing guiding, but regardless of what you call it, that pointing happens, but it's not obvious as pointing in a way. Well, maybe it
Hmm.
is. I don't know. Yeah. So I mean, there's an edge when Marius says, "I think we're lost in Storyland here," or his version of that, and I think, okay, yeah, that is story, but it seems to be useful story to me sometimes. Sometimes it's not. Sometimes because I do get carried away with that stuff. Um, but yeah, at the same time, there is a constant redirection of attention that goes on.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, it's all story ultimately. It's just a question of degree, I think. If when you're guiding, you're using a bit of story sometimes. You're using analogies. You might use metaphors. It's, but you're coming back to the moment
Mm,
and referring to these things to refer back to the moment rather than just getting lost in analogies and metaphors and stories and completely losing track of the point. So, yeah, it's a question of degree. There's no such thing as an absolute here.
mm. So I mean, people will say they come to these groups. Um, Usually, the prime story, the prime story that comes up is that they come to these groups because of the authenticity, the spontaneity, the intimacy, the fact that they can talk about things that they can't talk about with their family or friends because those people don't have this perspective, and so on. But I guess in the background, everybody comes. Well, not well, I shouldn't say everybody, but people will come because they've got stuck points that they want to get over, or because they've got curiosity about why something occurs. And so even those who've already awakened will, of course, have, there's no right words. I put it in single inverted commas and say issues or something like that, that people have these little points that they want to explore.
Probably so.
Yeah. And I find the difference between a post-awakened and a seeker fades into nothingness when it comes to that. It doesn't matter. There is no categorization or scale of how awake somebody is. It does happen in the background, but it doesn't happen in any other way. It's not overt. It's just pointing regardless. Yeah.
Yeah. It's it's kind of walking a fine line. I mean, you're just talking.
Yeah.
So the question is, if you've had the awakening or realization, awakening is too glorified. If you've had the realization, it's the question is, does it just work itself naturally into a normal conversation? And my answer is yes, it does. It just it just changes the nature of the conversation. To listen to someone who has had the realization talking, as opposed to someone who hasn't, there's a difference. There's just two people talking, but there's a difference, and you can just tell. You can say, "Oh yeah, he sees it," or "She
Mm.
sees it," even though they may be having a conversation with people about normal everyday things. So, I think it. I think that the realization blends itself in naturally without probably without effort.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, there's certainly no effort here. I never come with a plan or a structure, or I never even think about what I'm going to say. I just respond. Yeah.
Yeah, well, it's like a perfect example. The people that have listened to that recording of me just talking to Diane, and they'll say, "This one simple thing just struck me." You know, when he said,
Yeah.
like, people believe the voice in the head is who they are. That's so stupid and simple, and and for somebody, whoever it was, to just respond to that, I said, that's the thing that did it. None of the other
Yeah. Yeah.
glorified nonsense I said. That's the thing that did it. Or what was it? What's his name said the other day? He said, I don't know, some simple thing that was meant to be nothing. You know, none of it's meant to really be anything. And he just picked the simplest thing. And I'm like, if the simplest thing, and it does seem like the simplest thing sometimes is the thing that gets people. And I read that in the forums sometimes. They say, well, just something flipped, something you said, or something in an exercise. And it's kind of amazing that the simplest thing can be the thing that does it.
Yeah. Yeah. It's amazing, isn't it? And we don't know. We don't know ourselves. That's why we can't plan. You know, we don't have that control thing. We just respond, and yeah, things happen.
Yeah, I think that goes back to your point of just having conversations with people. Simple conversations can generate epiphanies. So,
Yeah. Yeah.
I said, this conversation's working pretty good. I'm enjoying just listening to you guys talk to each other.
cool.
Yeah.
But I mean, to me, it is, I mean, I wouldn't call this a support group, but it is a support group in a sense, um, for those of us who either do have the understanding or are close, or because I mean, at the end of the day, there's still a human experience happening for every one of us, or we wouldn't be here. And so there are ways in which we all get stuck into stories to some degree. And I find it helpful when someone catches that and kind of I don't know, kind of hones in on maybe what's underlying the story or what the sticking point is. Like sometimes somebody else can see maybe what your sticking point is and you can't see it. Like I can't see it, but you do see it, or
Yeah,
I don't know if
I
that makes
agree. Yeah, yeah. If it's a sticking point, it usually is because of something we can't see.
Mhm.
By its nature.
I think
The
for me,
ones I really
also
like.
comes back to
Go ahead.
something
Go.
Paul said about when you're just speaking. What I was just reflecting on, why do I come here? And it's it's just down to earth, everyday life from that different perspective. And sometimes just the way that I want to say handle, or just the way you interact with people is very, it's quite different to everyday life. You're just the acceptance and
Yeah,
not getting involved in other people's stuff, but just seeing it from that different perspective. That's quite rare to see in an everyday, and that's so I don't really see it as a support group. I think it's quite a gem to be able to come to a place and be with other people that have that same perspective,
yeah,
and some
and
much more than others, if that
and
makes
there's
sense.
yeah, it does, and there's something about that. So what got triggered here when you said that was that. So when I'm say with people in a social situation where I live here or with my family, this stuff doesn't even get mentioned. I don't even think about this stuff most of the time, I guess, or maybe I do, but not very often. And so I'm quite relaxed, but I don't access this depth of me, if you know what I mean.
Mm.
But here that's invited to be exposed. Here I'm happy to cry and laugh and swear and say whatever just comes out with no inhibitions at all. Whereas out there, even though I'm relaxed, there's always that apparent control thing going on. Or no, maybe it's not control, but it's just not there. I don't. Things don't get expressed at this depth that do here in these meetings, and that's really. It's just such a great feeling when I'm saying that, and I feel a tingling in the back of my neck. That's just what a great feeling it is to be able to be uninhibited to that extent. That just doesn't happen out there in a social situation.
And I guess exactly what you just described is what I would, when I use the word support, like that's kind of what I'm referring to. It's a group where you can relate to others who understand where you're coming from. Whereas, the vast majority of other humans that we interact with don't.
Mm,
They want to jump into the story and help you solve the problem instead of seeing what's underneath that.
yeah. I was going to say it's not that people understand where you're coming from, although some will. It's much more that they accept wherever it is you're coming from.
Yeah.
Not only accept, but even invite that. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like I don't see what you and Paul see. I don't see anything anywhere near as clear. But how I see it is I want to I want to be in the tailwind behind you. I'm I
I think that's hilarious.
The
do you know
tailwind.
what I mean?
Uh, Lou, you see a lot more than you think you see. That's that's how I respond to that one.
If you're here, you see a lot more than you think you see. That's true. But the thing is, we look at, without saying it expressly, although I say it expressly all the time, even though it scares people, you're looking at the nature of thought in the ultimate sense. And first of all, people don't don't do that. They just, I mean, maybe in a philosophy class or something, most people don't look at the nature of thought, just thought itself. A thought, pick any thought and look at a thought in and of itself. Nobody does that. I mean, we do that in this group. I do it explicitly. Um, and you're not going to get that conversation where you're going to get people caught in thought and
Yeah,
stories. They're floating along in the illusion rather than looking at the basis of what forms the illusion. You're not going to get that anywhere except in a true non-dual group. I mean, I can't talk about this stuff with anybody else. I mean, you just
yeah,
can't. People have to come to you. People have to come to this group who are
yeah.
already interested in stuff. You can't proselytize this stuff. You can't go out on the street and say, "Hey, buddy, you're not really a self," you know. That's not going to work for you. You're going to get the
They've
police called on you down here in this
they're,
fundamentalist community.
they've got
So it's
white
just looking at the
men in
nature.
white coats with straitjackets for people like that.
Yeah, that's why I really like the people who are really on the verge, the people who are questioning thought, really, really finally questioning in the sense that they can step back from a thought and objectify it in a sense, which is very difficult, if not impossible, for many people. They're so identified with their thoughts. So in this group, it's always a joy to see when somebody can finally pull back from that and look at a thought as an object rather than having the subjective nature of it and start questioning it. And they struggle and because they lapse back into, oh, this thought's more important than that thought. And you get into, well, what gives this thought the authority over that thought? And then they have to look back at that. It's very challenging for people, and it's a wonderful process to see people struggling with it. It's I consider it progress. That's why I
Yeah,
don't think anybody can walk away from any of these groups, whether they've had a realization or not, and not be better off for it
yeah,
somehow.
I agree. Yeah, and
and
and yeah, go on, Lou.
the other thing is that when you're going through that process, Paul, to be in a group where you know it is a process, and you're not going crazy.
Right.
That's been, I suppose that's the support nature, but it's much more than that. Um, yeah, I was going to say something else. I can't remember.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. No, that's a
yeah,
great point, Lou. You know, I had forgotten that some people, when they start pushing the boundaries, of getting to the edge of this stuff, from a standard social position, and especially those who are conservative by nature, um, would possibly see themselves as having a mental breakdown, or see themselves as having well, mental health is a big thing in this country these days.
yeah,
Um, so they would have said, and of course, if they go to a professional and say, "Oh, I, I'm having questions about whether there's really a self," then that professional is going to go, oh, okay, you've got a disassociation personality problem, you know, so we'll take these drugs, or let's see if we can fix that kind of thing. So
Yeah,
yeah.
or I don't see the point in, you know, that phase where you can't see the point in anything. And again, you know, we'll put you on some depression drugs, and you know, I've been down that route before, but it was different. It was like, you know, coming to a group like this, knowing that that is a part of the process,
Mm.
it helps you push through a bit more, and you can get that guidance to push through. Whereas if you're trying to do that on your own, you know,
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
you can't
Yeah.
see that. Yeah,
It's a transition point where we're neither one side of the fence nor the other side, and then that's an issue. But once we get
yeah.
over the other side, then of course it becomes a good thing, you know. Whereas before that, it's not. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. That's a big one, I think. Yeah.
It is, because when you come in these groups and you hear somebody who is at that point, and you've heard their struggles and what they saw, and then they come on the week later and something's changed, you know, that kind of thing sticks around.
Mm,
Kind of
mm.
is, you know, it's very helpful. And I think the other thing, certainly, that I have got from this that has really helped is just the direct experience, always going back to, you know, as Paul talked about, the thought, decoupling the thought from,
Yeah.
um, you know, subject, object, and actually experiencing that over and over and over again. I don't think I've ever been any groups, you know, I've been in this 20 odd years, where anybody really, really talks about the sensations and the direct experience
Mhm.
to that degree.
Yeah. Yeah. That's surprising because we don't realise how unique it is, until we come across something like that. But yeah, that's a big one, isn't it?
And I think that's a big thing that, I think a lot of people find difficult, you know, especially if they've had something happened that, you know, and the body gets into that state. And it's, if we're not used to going inside the body and feeling those sensations and really being able to stay with them, I think it's,
Yeah. Yeah. Well, so I think then so this brings up a point that anyway that jumps up here is that the the stickiness of imagining that what we're relating to is real when it in fact is just a brain generated reality. It's not actual. And that is so hard you can't tell people that. You can't tell people that they think they're relating to, let's say, a tree, when in fact they're not. They're only relating to their idea of a tree. And so that the breakthrough from that is into direct experience, where all of a sudden the story of a tree and the story of them relating to that tree gets put aside, and the direct experience of touch and sight and smell, etc., that's where the magic is. That's where the absolute magic is in this the whole thing that comes out of this is just that wow factor about everything and everybody. It's just, yeah, because of direct experience. That's a such a difficult hurdle to get over, that breaking up of, or recognizing that they spent their whole life relating to what they think is in front of them and not what is actual. How to get to that. And it's got to be discovered. You can't tell them. Yeah.
yeah.
It's
And I think
difficult to
early on,
become normal. I say it's difficult to become normal.
Yeah, yeah, well put. I like that. Yeah.
and early on, it is a practice. I mean, because I historically have had a really hard time going into the body, and so, but when I come to these groups and I kind of see it over and over with different people with whatever they're going through, then it just kind of helps reinforce that to become a more automatic process. Like today I had a bunch of feelings that were coming up, and so I'm like kind of go into labeling them, and they were like really opposite each other. Like, oh, okay, I feel both disappointed and relieved at the same time. Like that's really weird. But then I was like, but what does that like feel like? Like what? So I'm labeling it what I think that this is how I'm interpreting it, but what does this actually feel like in the body? And so then
Yeah,
like just going into that,
yeah, that's
and
great.
that's still
Yeah.
a practice here, so.
Yeah, Celine, that's another one that comes up here that I find it's really difficult to people. I don't know where these things come from, but it just occurred to me some time back that people think that they've got to be black or white, that they've got love or hate, or peace and chaos or whatever, that it's one or the other, that it's really a binary thing. When the reality is, and from experience I can say that it's obvious, really obvious, that both of those things can exist at exactly the same time. And not only can they exist at the same time, but they can't be described because language is either black or white. Language is got to be binary. You can't refer to them. What is the word to have love and hate at the same time? There is no word. There's no way of talking about it even. We can just imagine something. So the recognition that we can hold those things, and then the result is, it's kind of brilliant actually, it just occurs to me that you can only experience that. You can't verbalize it, you can't conceptualize it because there's no language that'll do that. You can only experience the fact, and that becomes a feeling, that mixture of feelings that can't be expressed. You can only experience it. But it's there all the time. We all the time can hold two things that is exactly quite opposite at exactly the same time. Difficult concept to get over. Well, it's impossible to get over as a concept. So thank you for triggering that one in me.
Sorry,
Yeah,
Vince,
it's a paradox that
I didn't understand that. Sorry, Paul.
Well, I was just saying it's not understandable. Sorry, yeah, go for it.
No, so you're saying, no, I'm trying to understand it.
I
I'm
can
just
say
gonna,
what I think I heard. What I was understanding from that was that you can have a feeling in your body that kind of feels like, to use Vince's words, love and hate, or mine today was disappointment and relief at the same time. So those two things are kind of opposite, and but there was a way that it felt in my body.
Yes.
But I had to put two words on it to say what that feeling was. But if I just go into the feeling, then there's just a feeling. So, and that can't be verbalized, but I can label it the best that I can to try to describe it to somebody. But if I
Yeah.
say that, somebody's like, well, what does that even mean? Like that you can feel relieved and disappointed at the same time. Like,
Yeah. 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 That's a better dichotomy than love and hate because that's that more extreme. But yeah, that's perfect. That's exactly what I was meaning. And if we just simply accept that we can hold that dichotomy at the same time, that it's not unusual and it's not, we don't have to jump one way or the other. People will normally say, well, you got to be one or the other. And the reality is, no, you don't. You can be both at the same time. It's just something that you can only experience. You can't really talk about it. Well, you can talk about it, but you can't get close to what it is with talking. Is that clearer for you, Lou?
I don't know. I don't
All
know.
right. Well, let's
It's
talk about it. Tell me what you think. or tell me what you feel. There's another good example, just to interrupt
Mhm.
before you get there. Another great example is thinking or feeling. Right? So if I say to somebody, tell me what you feel, more than half the people will give me what they're thinking. And I've asked them to tell me what they're feeling. They don't differentiate between the two.
Mm. Okay. Okay. So I wasn't going to talk about this, but as you've just brought this up, so I haven't had rage for a long, probably 4 years, probably 4 years. And I had, I was quite, I wasn't going to talk about it tonight because I feel quite vulnerable talking about it, but I will in this context that I was with my son yesterday, and he's on the spectrum and he's very slow, and it's not his fault or anything like that. But I was rushing to get out the door, and I was trying not to rush, so I was keeping stuff down. I was trying to be calm, and we got where we were going, and then he just wouldn't get out of the car, and all of a sudden this rage just appeared, and I was swearing. Like I don't swear in front of him usually, but I just could not stop. It was like a gushing, I couldn't stop it. And there was something watching what was going on. And it's had some kind of, this isn't right, you shouldn't do this. But these words and this anguish, and I could feel, because I actually went to the sensation, and it was all buzzing here. My head was absolutely about to explode. And then I also noticed as it was calming down, it was kind of there was sensation in the middle of the body. Um, so when you said that both's going on at the same time, I remember the whole thing slowing down to, there was something that was aware of what was going on. But there was awareness, but then there was the rage, and that was just expressing, and then there was awareness of the rage, and then it wasn't both at the same time. It didn't appear to be both at the same time, if that makes sense.
Mm.
It was like more of an in and out.
Yeah, so the awareness seemed to be outside looking in at the rage.
Yeah, but intellectually I know that that's not really
Well, don't worry about the intellectual
what
thing.
happens. Yeah.
So if that's the case, now this is a weird question, but see what happens. Did the awareness, did that part of you, let's not call it awareness, but did that part of you that was aware of what was going on have a sense of compassion and understanding and acceptance or judgment or anything else at the rage at the same time as the rage was there?
There was judgment and shock. There was
Right.
there was judgment and shock. Yeah, I was quite surprised.
Mm. So I'm
Yeah,
thinking, I wonder if that was even like a third aspect to it. So would you say that that judgment and shock was attached to the being aware part of you, or the rage part of you, or some other part of you altogether? Even a third part, maybe.
it was a third part, possibly, because it was also looking around to see if anyone could hear me shouting.
Hey, there's some identification, eh? For sure.
I remember it really clearly, like this stuff's coming out, and I'm looking around to see.
Yeah,
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 it was very
yeah,
bizarre what happened. Yeah, and then the
yeah,
shock of what was going on. It was like
yeah.
somebody else. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Wow, what a great experience. Fantastic. Yeah,
Yeah, and then watching later on as it all, but then what was
yeah,
interesting, the guilt and the shame and all the stories that I could see weren't true, but it was interesting how it all played out afterwards,
right.
and
Did you
it's
did you
slowed
get a
down.
relationship thing happening? Did you see how the guilt and the shame may have been an attempt to control the rage? I'm not saying it was. I'm just maybe it was, but maybe did you see the relationship between the guilt and the shame and the rage? And the being aware is also involved in that relationship thing, I think.
The guilt and shame didn't seem to come till afterwards. The the anger was coming from a story of woe me,
Yeah,
poor
yeah,
me.
yeah, yeah.
So so I saw that, but the guilt and shame afterwards was almost more emotionally painful. Like there
Yeah.
was the it lasted quite a while, the actual attachment to the grief and shame, because there was suffering, so much so I just wanted to get out of, I just wanted out.
Mm,
But at some point I saw that the suffering was because I was clinging on to that grief and shame. At some point I saw that, yeah, and then it faded away, and
mm.
the whole thing is now a story that I can relate. But
Sure, yeah, yeah, yeah.
um
So did you
yeah,
see at the time or at the time or later, did you see that the rage at one level was a, an attempt to control the situation, like attempt to get your son to get out of the car. So
yes,
it was a controlling issue, but at the same time it was expressing an out of control, a frustration
yes,
situation. So there's another dichotomy that was existing at the same time. Yeah, really
yes.
interesting again. Yeah.
That, yeah, it was like an uncontrollable control
Yes.
mechanism.
Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, I get that. Yes, it
Yeah.
was.
And what about the surprise that it's 4 years later this pops up?
Um,
You think you're done with that stuff, and all of a sudden it's back. What are your thoughts about that? Or how do you feel about that?
Yesterday I felt like, oh no, I'm at the start again. Here we go. That didn't last very long.
So the
Yeah,
story that I want to tell now about that is that I want you to recognise that you weren't back to square one. That wasn't definitely
no,
not going back to the way things used to be. That was just discovering a remnant that was still hanging there. There was still some belief in there that hadn't been exposed before this situation. So we can thank this situation for exposing that. And now that that's out and seen, if it happens again, it'll be another new one. It won't be the old one. It won't be the same thing again, even though it appears
yeah,
like the same thing. Yeah.
yeah. Today there was actually gratitude for seeing that. I think it was about control. I'm pretty sure it was about control. Because what happened, what lingered today was a very, very restless, irritable. It just couldn't get comfortable. It just at dis-ease today. Um, and to sit still was very, very uncomfortable. I
Mm.
just found that, and I haven't, that's not been the case for a long, long time. So I actually did sit with that uncomfortableness, and it is about control. I'm watching the mind. It wants to get everything organized, and I thought I really thought I'd gone past
Yeah,
a lot of
yeah,
that, but it
yeah,
just shows there's some more to come. Yeah,
yeah. Oh,
yeah,
there's always more. There's always more to come. Yeah, yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, I don't
It,
get surprised anymore if something pops up, but I am always curious about it. But yeah, because I can't imagine ever being totally free of everything. Yeah, there's
I
so
think
many
it was
nooks and crannies in there.
yeah, I think it was the magnitude of how it came out that
Sure.
was what I
Yeah,
was quite shocked at. Yeah,
yeah. Well,
yeah,
that's another thing that happens. I think that that magnitude again is very reasonable to me. That now there's no longer a lot of the filters that used to keep that stuff down at a lower level. You know, now we just it's completely unharnessed. You know, when it comes out, it explodes out like a volcano, and there's nothing. It's 100% instantly.
yeah,
Yeah.
yes, yeah, yeah, yeah. There was no harness on it.
Mm.
Yeah, yeah,
Thank you,
yeah.
Louise. That was great.
That's me. Yeah,
But that came out of that sharing of you came out of this idea about multiple things being in existence at the same time. That there's not really we don't have to be one or the other. That many things can happen all together.
yeah. Yes, it did. Well, and what's interesting is because I couldn't sit very easily today. I kind of did a bit of a compromise as I was having my lunch. I just decided to write what came up, and actually, there was it was really interesting because I would write. I'm looking at the grass needs cutting, and so all the mind stuff. And then I'd actually look at what I was eating, and I'd write down the pepper. It's red, it's crunchy, it tastes good. And then I was tracking the sensations that were happening, and I could realize I saw how quiet the mind got quieter the more
Yeah.
just got in tune with what was in front of me, which has been kind of a natural thing that's been happening. But I just played around with it today. It was just quite interesting.
Mm.
Yeah, and it was just literally it was just bouncing around.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. Yeah. I see you were
yeah,
playing with the interface between experience and mind.
mm, yeah,
So this is
yeah,
when we get further on, you know, like we start off at a really gross level with a seeker saying, well, all your thoughts are bullshit. And then we get to the point where you're at where you go, oh, look, isn't it interesting how the thoughts and the experiencing are not separate, not there, they are the same. There's not, it, so I run out of words with this stuff, but you were still flipping from thoughts and writing them down to what you were experiencing. So you were walking along the top of the fence almost there with thoughts on one side and
yeah,
experiencing on the other.
yeah. And the only reason it occurred for me to do that is because I've had a lot less thoughts. Like there's a lot less uh, identification thoughts. There's been a lot less of that. So it was just as I noticed that they had popped up and were quite loud today, that's when I thought I'd just have a little play around.
Mm. Oh, it's perfect. I love it. Yeah.
Yeah. So they were. It's very subtle, but they have a different. They had a different feel,
Mm.
and it was very and I even down to the handwriting. The handwriting was really fast
Yeah.
and grabby, and then it just got slower and slower. And I just wrote it all down. It was really, I don't know, I just got a bit
Mm.
playful with it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Quite interesting.
Yeah. That's another really
Mm.
interesting one that pops up here when you say that. Here you've got the experience of your hand writing thoughts.
Yes,
That's
I
great.
know.
I think that's excellent.
Yeah. And at one point I said, whose hand is, I was literally, I,
Yeah, watching it
it was
happen.
just
Yeah.
amazing that this is writing something that's, I
Yeah.
found the whole process in the end slowed down so much. It was just quite amazing
Yeah. Oh,
that
that got me
that
really
can
excited,
happen.
that one. That's great.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. All right. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Oh, thank you for this wonderful feeling I've got. Oh,
Mhm.
I was going to say, and there's Dennis looking like he's bored to death with it, but he just showed me he wasn't. Yeah.
I'm not bored. I'm just listening.
It's a stupid question when I think of it, but I don't know any other way to say. Does it make sense to you what we're talking about?
um, I was kind of listening and not listening and just watching faces and expressions, and it wasn't important to me, if I'm being honest.
Do you have a choice about being honest or not, do
Oh yeah, totally. I can be honest or not honest if I want.
you?
No.
So your experience was focused on what you were seeing rather than what you were hearing. Is that right? When you were seeing faces, expressions?
Yeah, yeah. The story wasn't interesting. Well, it wasn't. It was more faces, movements, eye blinks, and um, laughing and things like that that were interesting, as opposed to the in-depth nuances of the conversation.
Well, of course, those expressions weren't separate from the conversation, where they were coming from, I imagine. But that was the expression of the story that interested you. We, my wife and I have watched a couple of episodes of this show on TV, on Netflix or somewhere, I'm not sure, where one of the streaming platforms that said that it's called Poker Face, and the theory is this, that the theme behind the story is that this woman has got this amazing ability to tell whether when somebody's lying. She just looks at their face and she can tell whether they're lying or not, and it's portrayed as an exceptional ability that she's got. And if we don't talk about it as in the binary of truth or lie, that's
Mhm.
we've all got that. We all have no idea how much import comes in through our interpretation of people's expressions, the way they look in their face in particular, but their whole body, but in particular their face. it's a tell-all, isn't it, really? Even if we don't know what it's telling, if we can't articulate what it's telling, it's really interesting watching people's expressions.
I thought you were going to say, if somebody's lying because their lips are moving.
Well, that's true for a lot of people, I guess. Yeah, somebody in particular comes to mind. Yeah.
I think I missed the start of Louise's conversation. I was moving from downstairs to upstairs to set up here to sit here, so I might have missed. I know you were talking about sort of rage coming up, and it reminded me of me a couple of weeks ago and Phoebe the other night, and rage or life force moving, and that was the bit that kind of resonated. Um, but I kind of missed the middle bit, so I'm not going to say I was fully paying attention to the overall story or what you were saying. I was watching you earlier, Vince, and it was just coming across as sort of, well, there was a story going on in my head about how lucky we are to have this group and to, whether it's you, Paul, other guys as an anchor here, and we don't realize the importance of this right now. But if we're lucky enough to get a bit older and look back, we'll remember these times as great times, and it's something to be cherished. And I was watching you, and it was like I was watching a little 5-year-old looking out your eyes and just expressing and finding their way in the world. It was all very heart opening. So that's kind of another piece that was going on while I was listening.
Oh, that's great, Dennis. Do you mind if we cut that out and put it up as a testimonial for these groups? That was brilliant.
And then I was noticing why you're pinned as the talker, nobody else comes on screen. Might have missed that at the start. You probably don't want people on camera tonight. Is this one of those new talks
Yeah,
where people?
we're just gonna try something new, Dennis. Maybe just clip some bits just shorter, because sometimes the video is about 3 hours long, so if we can just chunk them up a little bit. And just for the EU regulations, you can't always have everyone on screen, so that was the idea. So we'll give it a go.
What's the EU regulation?
I think there's some certain countries, there's regulations about you have to get people's permission to put people up online and stuff like that.
Okay, all right, yeah.
Or just to capture, just to be safe, just to have Vince on the screen. Does that
Yeah,
make sense?
I seen Vince's email about trying new kind of approaches, and I didn't understand, Vince. You had mentioned something about you having to take people off clips, so you might be getting people asking you to take what they've said down after the fact. So it
that
might be
happens.
just some sort of, yeah, it might be just some sort of I don't know, terms and conditions. If you come on and you put your camera on, you're on. It's recorded. I think
Yeah,
sometimes the recording helps put manners on people, that you have to be a bit more considerate and put together about what you're saying. Get you to focus a little bit. But yeah, that's my view. Whatever way it works, I don't mind.
yeah. I kind of presume because everybody knows this is going to be published publicly that there's an implicit um, uh, permission for it given, but maybe that's not adequate under those EU rules. I don't know. Um, and so maybe I do
Well,
need to say things explicitly at the beginning about that. But then not
well,
everybody's here.
usually, yeah, but usually when you come on and it's been recorded, the Zoom does that for you. It tells people this is recorded,
Mm,
and you agree to it, and you kind of can not come on or come on if you want. So I think the technology helps with that. But anyway, what I'm sure it'll work itself through.
yeah, yeah. I did feel a bit funny about taking those videos down, but it was easier to do that than it was to actually edit that person out of the videos. That was going to be a big, big job that I didn't look forward to. So We just took them down. But you didn't answer my question. Are you happy for me to use that little thing that you just said about as a testimonial? If I make a video testimonial for the groups, would you be happy about that?
Absolutely. I wouldn't have said it during this recording if I didn't think it would. Yeah, absolutely.
Mm. I mean, it was beautiful the way you said it. I love it. You know, and it might just be what invites more people to come. Mm.
I remember early on with the recordings, I'd be thinking, God, imagine a friend watch this or a neighbor or a family member, but the chances of that are 1 in a million. And even if they did, it'd be like, then I go into work some days and I go, imagine someone at work's been watching these talks and says to me, "Oh, are you?" And I'd be like, Jesus, that'd be, the chances are so slim. But if it happened, I'd be like, wow.
Yeah, yeah. And if it happened and they showed some interest in it, that would be an opening for you, wouldn't it? That would be great. Yeah. And
Yeah,
actually start
exactly.
to explain a little bit of what this is about. I mean, we want the whole. I want the whole world to wake up, but they've got to be interested in it first. So whatever gets them interested is a good thing.
Yeah, and I'll always, the last, say, 4 months probably, I'd always bring a piece of this to work. And, it's funny because we do a lot of meetings online and it reminds me of here. And I'm kind of working for a company that's essentially like a startup in some ways, but it's a government entity. And we're all kind of finding our feet and getting to grips with a big workload. And I'll talk about kind of having, you know, a lot of compassion for each other and, you know, just being patient and working together. And even when I'm saying it, there's a real sense of being vulnerable that this is probably not the thing to say at work. But I always get good feedback afterwards from people about, that resonated. And so
Yeah,
bringing it into the world around me is something I've been trying to do. And it feels uncomfortable, or maybe it feels energetic when I do it. And that kind of tells me, well, that's the thing to do, the thing that makes you feel, I'm using the word uncomfortable, but it's just a way of the
yeah,
energy
yeah.
that
I
when it's
get it.
moving
Yeah,
around.
yeah. It's a big one. So I mean, there's a story here that says if somebody is self-conscious about being published publicly, that's a perfect example of identification, of selfing
Hmm.
going on. So that's something to work on. But at the same time, I get it because that's deeply conditioned in us. And although I don't ever feel self-conscious here, um, I can imagine that there are certain situations where I would. So it's obvious that there's still identification there here in me. Um, and then I forgot what else I was going to say. It doesn't matter. It'll come back or not. Oh yeah, that yeah. As much as it ideally there is no identification, therefore no self-consciousness about what might be revealed to the general public or whoever watches it. Um, that I respect that. I respect that the people still have that thing in them, and even though my story is it's better to work through that than to avoid it, I still respect that if it's there and they want to avoid it, that's fine. It occurs to me, Lou, you don't have to keep muting your video if you unless you've got a dog in the background barking or some big noise there. There's no reason to keep muting yourself. That way you don't have to unmute in order to say something. You can just be spontaneous.
I think Louise
Well,
farts a lot, so she likes to mute.
there's that politeness, isn't it?
You missed what Dennis just said, I guess.
I did, yeah. What did you say,
I
Dennis?
didn't say anything.
He doesn't want to repeat it. He's hiding from it. He said you fart a lot,
Okay.
therefore that's why you're muting it.
Well, it did actually cross my mind actually, but I didn't think it was appropriate, but you said it.
Right.
It's really funny. I don't know if Andre's on here, but I was listening to a conversation about that you had
Youth.
about just yeah, hi Andre, about just dropping off Zooms. And I really loved that conversation because it it looked at everybody's perception of a single thing going on, and I loved it. And because I think I was one of the people that dropped off, and the reason I dropped off because I don't like to disturb. I don't like the little messages that come up and I lose my flow. So it was I just thought that was such a great conversation. And it is comes back to this muting. It's this ingrained politeness that
Mm,
sometimes is quite limiting, and it kind of locks up sometimes, should I, shouldn't I? But yeah, that's where a lot of freedom has come, not have to abide or even worry about all those little rules,
yeah,
and you
yeah,
can't you can't control what other people think and all that kind of stuff. Yeah,
yeah. That's
yeah,
a great point too. Something that triggers here is that although we may continue to be polite, we're no longer compelled to be polite. We don't feel guilt if we're not. It's
yeah,
considered whether or not it's appropriate in a way, in a new way. So the new way is
yeah,
that we might still be polite if we've always been polite, but we don't have to be anymore. Whereas once upon a time, we would feel guilty if we weren't.
yeah, yeah,
So that's freedom from that suffering. Yeah. And another
yeah,
thing that comes to mind that I really like to point out is that I've had multiple um, experiences of people feeding back how they've got really good things from Andre talking, even though I'm just saying that for his benefit. We'll talk about him like he's not here because he's pretending to not be here. But I've had lots of people say, "Oh, that was a great conversation," or "That was a really good point that was brought up," or whatever, when he's been
yeah,
talking, and yet I imagine he tends to not see that significance.
Yeah, Andre's probably just relaxing in the bath right now, so he can't turn his camera on.
So you there, Tammy? No. Interesting. What I've got going in my head at the moment is this. I, Tammy works with bears in Alaska and
Mm.
in a national park, and I heard a recent thing where our friend Donald has opened up all of these national parks for logging and drilling and so on again, and I wondered if she was affected by that. So it's a story that I'm. It's a story that reaches my emotions. You know, I kind of feel. I get this newsletter once a week, I think it is, from a mob called Fix the News, and they basically specialise in good news. Um, and so there'll be a whole lot of points, and one of the points was that I felt joy about was the establishment of a whole lot of more protected areas, and I think this one was in the ocean. There's now a huge area of reserve or protected from commercial fishing, etc. That's I see as going to have a really good effect, and I felt good news about that. I felt good about that, and I felt sad about now Mr. Trump seeing that the commercial value of the national parks is much more important than the nature or the climate value of them. It's all about money for him. That made me feel a bit sad.
So one thing I'm curious about, when you and Paul were talking earlier, you were talking about beliefs. And so I actually had a thought at that time about about Trump and just not just him, but the whole like would it be considered a belief that like when it comes to um subjects such as this that we should take care of the planet or that national parks should be you know that things should be a certain way and I certainly agree from an opinion standpoint with everything that you just said, but what is the difference between like an opinion and a belief
Yeah, it's a good one. Yeah,
in that kind of context?
yeah. So this is the story that I've got here about that, and it may or may not be even close to accurate, but essentially, I would see that if we have beliefs, we don't know that we've got beliefs. We don't know that that's a belief. If we were to know that it was a belief, it wouldn't be a belief anymore. Why do I come to that conclusion? Beliefs, so the whole idea of a belief is that's just a story, a concept that there is a belief or what a belief is. What is a belief? It's not something tangible, is it? It's a it's a particular way we relate to something. And I just came up with an example in my mind that from what somebody told me about where they've got a belief and they're so adamant about it being true, even though in my mind it's absolutely not true. And yet even though I point out to them that it's not true, they had this cognitive dissonance but that they get over it by simply saying, well, I'm going to continue to believe that regardless. So maybe it doesn't have to be, but maybe frequently it is something that we don't actually see that we've got. We just see it as a truth, or we see it as the way things are. And I certainly believe, see, I say the word, it comes out of my mouth, believe. I certainly believe that it's important and valuable to look after our planet, which means looking after the climate, which means, and so if I get into details, having lots of trees and national park and letting animals do what animals need to do, in a balanced way, of course. Uh, so that, I can say yes, I have those beliefs. I certainly, if you ask me to adopt the opposite belief that it's okay to cut down all the national forests and use the timber, it's okay to drill everywhere for oil, and we have no concerns for the climate. That the feeling in my body is just cringe. It's just horrible. I don't like that. So obviously I've got a belief about that, but that's just a story that I've got a belief. That's the overlay to describe what it is that I feel. So it sounded a little bit messy. I don't know if that answers your question, Celine. I don't know that we can determine what a belief is.
Interesting topic for discussion. I mean, I think at the time you guys were talking about topics of discussion. So
Yeah,
there's, I think,
that's a good
certain
one.
things.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I can narrow in, I think, on what Vince is pointing out in a way, in that a, a, a belief is, I would say, a story with a strong emotional component, as opposed to a story that doesn't have a strong emotional component. Oh, I'm going to the doctor today. It's matter of fact. It's a Is it a belief? Well, everything's a belief ultimately. We believe in the world. But a story that we tell that doesn't elicit a strong feeling in us, you can say it's just a story. But when it elicits strong sensations, being positive or negative, that's when it seems to be a belief. And the way you can tell is when someone challenges the story, if you react really emotionally to that challenge, then you know you have a strongly held belief. For instance, if I go up to someone in my local Baptist church who's a firm believer in Jesus Christ, the Son of God, and all of this stuff, and they have that firm belief, and I were to approach them, not that I would, but say, look, Jesus was a historical figure, but this Son of God stuff, that's all just a story. They, by and large, if that is a strongly held belief, they are going to react very emotionally to me with with anger possibly. Whereas somebody who goes to church just to bring the kids in to be sociable and they're not really tied to that stuff, they'll say, well, Paul, you know, okay, what difference does it make? You know,
Yeah, yeah,
I bring my kids to church to socialize them. You know, it's not that important to me. So the same story in one person, the hallmark of belief is the emotional reaction when it's challenged in a way. That's the
yeah,
way I
yeah,
kind
yeah,
of
yeah.
look
I
at
like
it.
that. That's really good. I thought of the example that I believe tomorrow is going to be another day. I believe tomorrow there will be daylight. And I say, there's no emotion involved in that. It's just a statement of fact as I see it. So it's a belief that there will be daylight. And then you bring in the idea that if somebody challenges it, if somebody said, no, there won't be daylight tomorrow, obviously I'm gonna defend the idea that there is going to be daylight tomorrow. So yeah, that's a belief. Yeah, good one. That challenge of it is really the revealer of the fact that it's a belief. Let's challenge it
Yeah.
and see what happens. I like that. Thank
So
you, Paul.
we find ourselves repeatedly triggered by like a similar story, I guess, then it would kind of be an indicator that it's worthwhile to question what the belief is behind that.
Yeah.
It look questioning beliefs, if nothing else, brings a certain settling down of emotional turmoil generally. People people when they have the realization and they begin to see through the belief in I and the belief in this, that, and the other, They generally, one of the hallmark characteristics and one of the things I look for in confirmation is there's a sense of openness and relaxation about it. And the way I equate that is there's less emotional turmoil reacting to the fact that the guide is saying there is no I. Because many people, when they first come into Liberation Unleashed, what comes up? We ask them what comes up when we say there is no I, me, my. That's all just labels and concepts. Many people have a strong emotional reaction to that. Very strong. I mean, some people just walk away from it absolutely. Usually the emotional reaction is fear or anxiety or something like that. Whereas after you see the realization that the I is just this empty concept, if you say the same thing to them, they're not going to react emotionally. They say, oh, I see it. I
Mm.
see that was just a belief. That emotional turbulence that's associated with the challenging of that belief is gone. And as other beliefs fall away, that emotional turbulence tends to settle down as well. It's certainly been my experience, and I think it's the experience of many other people as well.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And it's a good indicator, isn't it? That one,
Yeah,
yeah.
it's almost universal. You know, that's the one I look at the most is is that loss of the contraction, which is a subtle form of anxiety that everyone carries around, at least in the Western world.
Mm. Yeah, yeah, yeah. So that brings up for me when at Liberation Unleashed the guide imagines that whoever they're guiding has had a shift, and those final questions, those checkpoint questions are put to them. When I'm reading those to see my opinion of whether or not they've had a shift, I look for the tone of voice in what they've written rather than the content of the words. I want to see gratitude, I want to see humility, I want to see humor. If I see those things, and that's
Yeah.
just a reflection of exactly what you said, you know, there is no emotional response to those things in a negative way. That's good.
Paul, when I was listening to you talk there about not the I, and I, I wasn't triggered, but yet the thought came up. But yeah, I'm not triggered, but I still believe I'm an I. I haven't seen through that yet, so I was like,
Well, it's just a question of how you define the I. I can say I'm an I. It's just a question of how I define it. You know, if I say, well, I have emotions, so that must be an I. Well, if I'm defined by my emotions, yeah, there's an I. But if I'm not defined by the fact that emotions come and go, then I don't have an I. It's just what aspect are you pointing to that you're hanging the label I onto?
yeah, I'm listening to you.
Yeah, so I would point out that the way I see it, the way I see it, is that it's what's your relationship to the word I? So when you say I have emotions, Paul, I see that as purely a descriptive term, and that there's no actual ownership or belonging or identification with the word I. And so that's what I listen to about that. Well, that's what I imagine. So with Dennis, I wonder what your relationship to the word I is. When you say there's still an I, do you get a feeling in the body if you say it? So I'll get you to say it in a second, that I still believe in an I, and I want you to notice what it is you feel when you say that. Are they just words coming out of your mouth, or is there a sense of ownership or sense of belonging or a sense of home in that word I?
Yeah, no, it's not a heavy I, and I did say it. I think it slipped by. I just like the sense of the I is I'm listening to Paul. And that was the I that I was. You talked about I'm having emotions, and I just went I'm listening to Paul, and
Hmm.
that's where the I is. So
So that's just
it's more like
a description. You could also say listening to Paul is happening, and that would be maybe more accurate, and have the same feel about it?
That feels like a sort of bypass, a sort of a kind of a,
So that disowns the ownership part of it that you still experience.
well, that feels like it's a workaround. It's a sort of, well, I'm listening to Paul, but I don't want to say that. So I'll say there's, there's listening taking place here or something.
Well, which does one feel more accurate than the other? Like you have to put aside the fact that we wouldn't normally talk about it like that. We wouldn't normally say listening to Paul is happening. So if we put aside the fact that it's unfamiliar, not the normal way of talking, and we're not avoiding, but maybe avoiding is the primary thing for you. But if it's not avoiding, is it more accurate than the first one? Or does the first one feel more accurate? No, I don't mean more familiar. I mean more accurate.
More accurate, I think.
Which one? That I am listening to Paul.
Yes,
Hmm.
that I am here.
Hmm.
Well, the fact that there is existence, if you want to label pure existence, do you see what I'm, existence or being, you're a human being, you are being,
Being, yeah.
being is
Or
happening.
existing. Existing works better than existence.
Yes.
Existing,
Does
yeah.
does existing need the label I?
No, it's to form communication and to just use language, I suppose.
I was thinking of it earlier, like there's these, I don't know if well, in Austin, close to where I live, there's these cars downtown that are driverless taxis, basically. And so there's no driver and you can get in it and, get a little ride around downtown. Um, and so I was thinking, like, what if the car started thinking that it was driving itself? Like, I'm giving these people a ride to this other location, or I mean, to me, it almost seems like that. Like it's as if, because like when I say the word I am referring to essentially the organism here that's having a human experience. But I can't, and I could say I'm listening to Paul, but I can't control really if I'm listening to Paul because I could go off in thought, or I mean, like it feels like something I can control, but I know that I can't control it. So it's more like a belief that I have that control. That maybe none of that makes any sense whatsoever, but I love analogies. So sometimes I'll think of like try to,
Oh, that's a brilliant
if I
one,
were going to
Saul.
explain this to someone else, like how would I like
Yeah,
try to explain this?
that's a brilliant one. I really, really like that. So yes, Dennis, you're a driverless car. And how stupid is it for the car to think that it's doing the driving?
Well, I take comfort in the fact that you said I am a driverless car. So,
Okay. Yeah.
Right. Language creates the trap every time.
hmm hmm
I
yeah.
was just thinking as well that I was just thinking like sometimes I sense that it's the implications of knowing that, even though you play the game of I and me, and because you're living in this life, but even just listening to what you said earlier, Dennis, about at work, you felt like there's the way that you did something, you felt a bit uncomfortable saying something, but I'm guessing that comes from there's an implication there that something inside knows that it's, that truth, and that therefore the filter by which it comes out is going to be different. So that's what I see sometimes. It's just the implications of actually what happens or what I say is coming from a different place, even though I'll say I, me,
Yeah,
mine.
what comes up when you say that is that there's less protecting going on, which allows that to happen. I could say that's less self-protecting or protecting of me and you know my ideas and my um, idea of myself. That's lessening so that I don't need to protect the separate self, as it were, as much.
Yeah, well, that's
Yeah.
a big one. That protection is really what the self is all about. It's a protection, a protective device, if you like.
Yes. Frequently, that's what people end up identifying as the I, is the actual protective mechanism. Well, it just feels like there's a. You could take everything away from somebody, got it, and then they'll just you get them against the wall and say, well, it just feels like there's a me, and it's so okay. Well, what particularly feels like me? What are you? What is me the label pointing to? Is it a sensation? You say it feels like me, and you have to look. Are you identifying a sensation, a protective mechanism as me? That's the next thing to look at, which is difficult for many people.
It feels
Yeah,
like the very beingness or the very core of being, presence, silence. That's what I'm calling the me or the I.
Nothing wrong with that. If I say, yes, there's an existence there, but it doesn't have to be, if I say there is no I, and you can accept that you can accept that there is simply existence and it's a fact, then that's a step in the right direction, if not the end of the trip.
Yeah, no, and
I,
I can accept that as what's hearing it,
the
but it's
fact
just
that
back.
I brings up feelings of one way or another is fine. So you're identifying as the feeling, but you don't need the I for the feeling to be there. It's just a feeling. So again, I question, what are you hanging the label I on? Existence? Does it need it?
on this, I just differentiate, people in the beginning have trouble with differentiating between a sense of an I and an actual I.
Yes.
Because I mean, it really takes a thought to have to come in and label that sense for it to then become an I.
Absolutely. Yep.
Yes. It takes work to be a me.
Mhm.
Yeah.
A lot of
And
work,
It
that
does.
very
actually. Yeah.
subtle contraction that kicks in, and then the stories. Yeah. I was just thinking back to that rage yesterday. It occurred to me when you were talking about a protection mechanism. It's almost like it was really like stamping its feet. I am here. I am here. Um,
Yeah,
why are you
it
not
was.
listening to any of? Why are you not listening to any of my stories anymore? Because I heard them. I they came up, but that's not true. That's not true. That's not true. But it tried really hard. Yeah, yeah, protecting something.
Well, that brings us to an interesting one, and I have had disagreements with other guides about this one in the past, but I believe, no, everything I say, I believe that when we stop identifying with an I as a separate self running the show, well, let's say when we quote, quote, wake up, that we still have identification, except now I identify as somebody who has had a shift.
Yeah.
And they'll go, no, 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 there's no identification at all. Well, I think that's bullshit. I think there's always identification. But it's recognizing, right? It's recognizing that it's an illusion. And I keep coming back to that perfect example that turned up here one day is go to the magic show and watch the magician saw a woman in half. And your senses tell you for sure she's been sawn in half. But your mind says no. Now, how come nobody's calling the ambulance or the police or saying stop? They recognise that it's an illusion, and the reality is, if you went back to that show every day of the week, by the time you've been there about 4 or 5 times, you're totally bored with it. And so I see that as a perfect analogy for the self. I recognise that the sense of self is an illusion created by exactly what Celine said, and that is the mind coming in and saying that this feeling I've got validates the idea that there's a self there. But I also, at the same time, recognise that it's an illusion that's created, and I'm bored with it. So why bother even referring to it? That's my story anyway. Yeah.
Right. It's empty. The
Yeah.
I, me, my are boring. I mean,
Mm.
it's add-ons, you know, in a way, I don't
Unnecessary
even,
add-ons. Yeah.
except in a conversation. I mean, I don't even know that the pronouns even so much surface in thought so much anymore. It's just unnecessary add-on. It's
Mm.
boring. That's a good point. They're just boring. Why? It's superfluous.
Yeah.
But
Why would you keep going back to that show a thousand times?
right, right.
I kind of feel like I can't believe anymore that people have had a shift or are awake. It's it's just words and talking, and until I've, it's like everyone's talking about juicy oranges, and until such time as I've tasted a juicy orange and can relate, I'm just like, you can say
That's
what you
right.
like, but I
It
don't
is
believe it.
just words until you've tasted it. Exactly. Yeah. But I keep offering you an orange and you keep knocking it out of my hand saying, no, I'm okay.
Well, would you not just shove it down my throat?
I can't do that. Yeah.
Hmm.
Even though you want me to and don't want me to at the same time. No, I'll just happily keep offering until one day you pick it up and take a bite.
And it didn't, and the word, even the word waking up, even though it's commonly tossed around, I do it too. It's a realization on a very fundamental level. It's just a realization of a concept being empty. It's
And so the way I see it is that results in a shift in perspective. We just look at things differently as a result of that.
I agree.
But would you say it's grace that it's given?
Oh, bullshit. What a story.
It if you like that story, I mean, if you whatever makes you feel good. The realization is what's important. If you think God gave it to you, well, that's fine. The realization is the nuts and bolts. How you got it, to me, is less
Yeah,
important.
that's right. It's irrelevant. I mean, it's a valid story from one perspective. You know, you can say that yes, it's grace, and that is another way of saying, well, we don't actually know what brought about that shift. What was the trigger that suddenly enabled us to experience a new perspective? We just don't know what that is. So saying it's grace is a fairly legitimate way to describe that. But it is just a
Or
story about it, eh?
or saying it comes out of the blue.
Yep,
It's the
just
way
as well,
many people,
just same, yeah.
so, God, blue. Because many people, when we ask them the questions, the way, the wayfaring or the carnal questions, was there one thing that finally pushed you over? And every once in a while they'll say, well, it was a particular exercise, but many times they'll say they don't really know what one
Mm,
thing it was. Or they may say it was, I don't know, it's just kind of a process, which I agree with. It's a series of many times of smaller realizations that tend to accumulate at
yeah.
some point.
I wonder if that's something that it appears to me like more people these days are saying, oh, it just snuck up on me than they used to. Used to be always look for that one shift or that one point of change. Now people are often saying, oh, it just accumulated. It just happened over a period of time, or it just snuck up on me, or however you want to phrase that one.
You know,
Does it seem to you like that's a more recent phenomena than it used to be, or is it just the way I saw it?
uh, I, what, I've never really looked at it from that point of view, but I can say many people say it like that. It just, and that's the way it was for me. It just hit me one day. Now, there had been a series of valuable insights leading up to it, but the afternoon when it actually sunk, or when the penny sunk, it just came out of the blue. It just, oh, it's one of
Yep.
those aha moments when something just clicks and there is no explanation for it.
Mm,
I can't point back to any one thing in the process and say that was it. But somehow all of that together, boom.
yep. And that's
And
what
so,
Dennis is
yeah.
waiting for. Dennis wants to experience that moment where he realizes, and he hasn't yet. Is that right, Dennis?
Yeah, well, I mean, the way Paul speaks about it there, that penny dropping, I can
Mm,
relate to what he's saying, but yeah, the penny hasn't dropped.
mm.
Or you have had the realization, but some belief that that was not it snuck in. And that goes back to expectations that people have. Many people, many people have seen it, and they come into aftercare and say, well, I had it and I lost it. And they genuinely may have had it. You look at the confirmation and say, well, yeah, that it seemed apparent. But they come in genuinely saying, but then I lost it. That means some expectation or some belief has crept back in and gained strong emotional support in them again. So you have to keep an open mind about it.
Yeah, I don't even think I've had that experience of I've had it, I've lost it. I think I'd know if I had it and lost it, and I'd be saying it quite a bit. I don't think I've ever said that. Um,
Well, you're certainly in the right place. I mean, it doesn't get more pointed, I would say, than in this group, is pointing it out. And I would dare say it's had more of an effect on you than maybe you even give it credit for.
Yeah, maybe it just occurs to me that maybe that penny dropping is really not so much. See, we kind of can see it, even though it's a story, we can see it as a literal thing, and that penny dropping is the sudden realization. But maybe that happens because all of a sudden the need for the protection drops, and it allows stuff that's been there and been hovering around and we've accumulated to kind of take prominence. So it's not so much a case of adding something, the penny dropping, adding, being that final bit of realization that pops in, as much as it's the final bit of protection that drops out and allows that accumulation of stuff to show through. Maybe it's just a story that popped up here.
No, I would agree with that. I would agree with that. The when I say the penny dropping, and maybe it's a mistake to put it in positive terms, the penny dropping is is suddenly an absence, just what you're pointing to. It's something something is just gone. It's difficult to characterize it with language being what it is,
Mm,
but but in a way it was subtle and amazing at the same time. It was a very subtle realization, like, oh, I just figured out that math problem. But the effect is what seemed amazing about it. Just
mm,
maybe the dropping of that tension that was inherent in it. It's a good point
Mm.
you've made. I tend to look at it from that perspective and agree wholeheartedly. It's not gain something all of a sudden as much as a loss.
yeah. Yeah, when I think back to my penny dropping moment, it was it was there was inclusive of it was this. How obvious is this? How come I didn't see this? This is so obvious. How come I didn't
Yeah,
see it all those years of 45 years of being a seeker? And I never saw this thing that is now so obvious. It was like,
exactly.
yeah, crazy.
I just started laughing. I
Yeah,
really
yeah,
did.
yeah,
I've been chasing this. I mean, it's so simple. So
yeah,
I
yeah.
agree.
But we're just giving Dennis something else to yearn for here.
But I don't think you were chasing this. You were chasing a belief, an idea, a story. You
Yeah.
couldn't have been chasing this. And then then you said you just missed this, but like you can't miss this, can you really? Did you really miss it all those years?
No, but looking back, I was covering it up with stories, basically.
Yeah, agree. Thinking it was everything else.
Yeah.
It hides in simplicity, is what I like to say.
Yes.
Most stories that you believe are complicated and take work. Get the simplicity of this is, I don't know, simplicity, maybe it's elusive to the mind.
Oh, well, I agree. I agree. I definitely think the mind wants to complicate things, and that's part of its the way the method it uses to defend is to make things complicated. If we
Well,
keep it
and
hidden, you're going.
I was just gonna, and I'm gonna use the God thing again, just as a sort of a way of talking about it. So,
"Hmm,
if everything is God, and for God to experience itself, it has to manifest, and we're all part of that manifestation. So, why would God want to awaken to itself? What's wrong with being asleep? And then that tension between the two of kind of awakening versus just living the dream. And why would you want to wake up and deprive God of the
Oh,
experience
I've got an
of
easy answer to that.
separateness?
I've got an easy answer. Yeah, this is something that I went through. One of my periods in the seeking period was following a, a Jane Roberts character called Seth, and Seth knew everything, kind of thing, you know. Anyway, so he said that God is manifesting itself as humans in order to experience what humans experience, and I can extend that to say the moment of realization is an orgasm that God's addicted to, and he likes to experience that moment, that orgasm, but he's not losing anything, because there's people being born who are still, he can still experience separateness forever and ever, because there's enough people to do that. But those few that wake up, that's the orgasm that he's chasing. He loves that one. So God's a habitual masturbator. There's no question there.
That's a
God is
new
playing a
one.
game.
Yeah.
God is playing a game. There's another simple explanation. This is amusement.
But when you wake up to the fact that you are God.
Yeah. I mean,
Well,
it's 15 years ago that happened for me, and I can still remember the wonderful feeling of that moment of realization. So I suspect that that's probably a big part of it. Even if it only happens once in your lifetime, I would never not want it. It was so beautiful. So, and it's still resonating. So God's getting impatient with you. Come on. He wants that orgasm. No, he's not. He's ultimately patient, of course.
Yeah, the only thing I can remotely relate to what you're saying is years ago when I had sort of what I call an experience, different experiences, but this one was when the sense of, well, it's when the sense of I fell away. It was like something in the middle dropped, and just talking and doing things, but kind of conscious of the fact that there's no I talking, there's no body talking. And it was like, it was only for a minute or two, and it was very freeing and curious and exciting. Didn't last very long. Like, I can imagine if that state, or if that evolved over days and weeks, that might be something quite profound, and how it would affect everything might be something. But that's all a story. But that was a brief thing that I can only use that to relate to what you're saying. Other than that,
Did,
I have
did,
no.
I'm going to jump in here. Do you recognize that you just told yourself a story in order to take yourself away from that feeling that you got when you were remembering that moment? When you were remembering that moment, it was starting to have an effect on your body, I imagine. And then you got into this story about, oh, it was only for a moment, and it was, and it was gone. But if you go back to just that moment, you can remember that you had that moment. And when you remember that moment, you're going to start to feel it again. It's there. It changed you. That moment changed you. I don't care if it was 30 seconds long. That moment changed you. Why are you avoiding it? Don't answer that. It's not really a question. Mm.
I'm definitely, well, I don't think I'm avoiding it, but yeah. No, I mean, I was remembering, and I was trying to remember the feeling of, I'm remembering a story in my head about how I reacted to this kind of saying to somebody, I'm talking to you, but there's nobody talking to you. And it was kind of shocking, but it was quite fleeting.
so you had it and you lost it.
Well, if that's it, um,
So the had it is easy. That just came. The lost it part is the complicated. That's where you started adding on. You need to look at lost it. and find out what
Well,
that
it
actually means.
well, whatever happened wasn't something I did. It just something just dropped in that moment,
Mm.
and then after a few minutes, the sense of I came back or whatever, something changed, and I was
Yeah,
back to
defenses kicked in. Yeah, but it happened. You have the experience, and it's there in your body, not in your mind. It's there in your body that you had the experience, and the effect of that experience still exists because you can tap into a sense of wonder the moment you just think about it, can't you?
but that's an experience I had. It's not necessarily, I don't know that that's awakening. I don't know.
Okay, Colin, you're really strong on these avoidance kind of stories. Did it happen or not?
What I'm describing happened, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Stop there. Don't go any further. It happened. Now, what happened? You described it as
The sense of I fell away.
yes, beautiful. Now stop there. That was a happening. We're not talking story now. We're describing what happened. Now, when you say the sense of I fell away, it's obvious that that is just a way of expressing something. But that something you're expressing was a physical experience that
Yeah, it was like a
changed you.
clarity, a freedom,
Yes, lovely. Keep going in that direction. A
safety.
clarity, a freedom. Yes, beautiful. And how could you say clarity and freedom came into prominence when the sense of I dropped away? Did you say the sense of I or the I?
Same
What
thing. The I dropped away.
the I dropped away and it revealed clarity and what was the other thing you said?
Excitement and freshness,
Yes, yes,
amazement, actually. That was the other thing, yeah.
yes.
Because I remember saying, I'm talking to you, but I don't know what who's
Yeah,
talking.
awe, sense of awe. Yes, beautiful. Yeah.
I always just put that down to
No, no,
like the
no,
chanter
no,
used
no,
to.
no, stop, stop, stop. Don't put that down to, you know,
A lifting
well,
of the veil, he used to say, a glimpse. That's
yeah.
given, and then you have to work back to the permanent whatever shift. I don't.
Yeah. Okay, okay, yeah. So I want you to at least once a day go back to that what we talked about, that eye dropping and the other characteristics of that, but look out for the inclination for stories that negate that, that stories that kill that, that deny that, that protect against that. Look out for those stories. Now, don't do anything with them. I'm not saying if you recognise one of those stories, don't try and stop it, but just recognise that what it is. It's a story to take you out of that, and that may just, in fact, allow you to re-experience it in more detail, in more depth. That and that may be the way that we'll get the penny to drop, rather than through anything that we say. Do you follow what I'm saying here?
Yeah, no, I do. I hear you.
Yeah. So just once a day, I want you to exercise this particular muscle, that of bringing back to life something that you have experienced, and it has remnants in the body. So you watch when you're describing the characteristics of it, that what you're feeling, and what you'll be feeling is exactly that, what you experienced then.
My mind is saying, well, if they're all living from that place that you experienced, they're lucky bastards.
Right. So that also says that you've got a story there that it's not for me, I'm not there yet, it's not happened, and so on. Okay. Recognize those as stories to take you out of that feeling. Right. Your impulsive, habitual, natural reaction is to avoid that place. And I just want you to recognize the stories that do that for you, that help you to avoid it. I don't want you to stop them. I just want you to recognize when they turn up. And then once a day, do this exercise. Can I get a commitment from you?
Yeah, no, I'm doing it right now. Yeah, sorry, yeah.
Yeah, great, great. My heart is thumping and I feel so positive about this. I just feel like, wow, this is it. I can see the entrance to the cave. Let's go. Yeah, great. So I'm told that I should ask at the end of every meeting for people to think of one thing they got out of this meeting. I don't need you to necessarily say it, but I want you to think, what's one thing you got out of today's meeting? And you're welcome to say it if you choose to. But I love it because it's a great segue into saying it's time to finish up, which always made me feel a little uncomfortable. Uh,
I actually get a lot out of it. I get quite a bit out of every meeting. It's always refreshing. So if I had to pick one thing, I think it's seeing that it's more the loss of something than the gaining of something, which I think people chase the positive thing they're going to get. And it's the opposite. It's the loss. And that's, can't overemphasize that, I would say. Anyway, it's my two bits.
hmm.
I really enjoyed the conversation that you and Paul had at the beginning out of that. I'll go back and listen, maybe get some specifics.
All right. Well, thank you, everybody. I'm feeling great here. Lots of things, and whether it's because it was the most recent good feeling I had, or whether it was because the most prominent feeling I had, but I just love what we just did with Dennis. I thought that was brilliant. Well, brilliant, not smart, brilliant, but I thought it was illuminating. It was great. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Yeah. All right. Bye bye.